Good afternoon, Chairman Diaz and Chairman Peisch. My name is Marilyn Siegel, and members of the committee. My name is Marilyn Siegel. I'm the Executive Director of Citizens for Public Schools. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak today. I want to speak in favor of a moratorium on Commonwealth charter schools and against Senate 235. Commonwealth charter schools are not the unqualified success the press and the charter school cheerleaders and the people who heard this morning would want us to believe that they are. We are long overdue in having an impartial study of the quality of education and the impact on Commonwealth charter schools have had in Massachusetts. Most people don't realize that nationwide, only 17% of charter schools showed better results than traditional public schools. I'm sure some of those Massachusetts charter schools. While a whopping 37% show worse results than their sending school districts. The rest are about even. This is according to another Credo study out of Stanford University. Studies by the Federal Department of Education and the American Federation of Teachers showed similar results. Charter schools with their flexibility and autonomy were supposed to motivate struggling district schools to achieve higher levels of quality. Instead, what has happened is district schools face increasing concentrations of challenging students and fewer resources to meet their needs, as charters take more money from local school budgets and sends back to the district schools students who couldn't make it in charters, often without the money coming in. It is outrageous that the city of Boston now spends 10% of its school budget on charter school tuition. But the two bills before you would repeal the only real cap that's left, and that's the cap on net school spending that can be spent on charter tuition. As you mentioned, Representative, it's a different thing when you talk about just lifting the cap statewide. Current law limits the startlingly high amount to 18%, while Senate 235 and H 425 would blow this cap off, allowing an unlimited amount of public school funds to go to charter tuition in Boston and other low-performing districts. Remember that charter schools take fewer special needs students, fewer English language learners, fewer very low-income students than district public schools. And when students in charter schools are, quote, unsuccessful, whether due to behavior problems or academic problems, they are forced out of the charter school and return to the regular public schools. Charter schools in Massachusetts still have high dropout rates. In fact, Boston's highest performing charter schools are high performing primarily because they push out the students who don't meet the high standards. The charter school movement began as a way to encourage wide-ranging innovation. In urban districts, however, charter schools seem to be converging on one approach, which involves long hours, an obsessive focus on test preparation, highly precise rules for behavior, and severe discipline for breaking even minor rules. Perhaps because of this approach, an MTA report found that on average only 40% of charter high school freshmen in Boston make it to the senior year. I'm not talking about graduation, just making it to the senior year, compared with 80% of Boston district school freshmen. Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan had called schools with 2 out of 5 freshmen didn't make it to the senior year. He called them dropout factories. Why would we want more of such schools? And I do want to mention that information is in fact on the DESC website. You can find out about suspension rates. You can find out about dropout rates. You can see when kids get entered school, the charter school, and when and how many get to senior year. The average Massachusetts charter school loses 1/3 to 1/2 of its teaching staff every year. It is generally a very young teaching corps. Teachers don't stay long enough to become experienced veteran teachers. Several studies have concluded that it takes 5 to 7 years to become a high-quality teacher. For years, we've been hearing about the waiting list for charter schools, using that as a reason to call for more charter schools. The Boston Globe finally exposed the scam on April 7th of this year. CPS was not surprised. We had looked at annual reports of charter schools and found that a high portion of them were actually advertising for students. When it comes to comparing district and charter schools, the playing field is unfair. Charter schools are allowed to limit class size, exclude taking students mid-year, push out the more challenging students, and to continue to get the full funding at the expense of district schools. To mitigate the unfairness, House 491 calls for local approval of charter schools. Under current law, local communities have no authority over charter schools, but are required to pay for the charter school students under the local school budget. This bill would require local approval before being required to fund the charter school. If the local does not agree to fund it, the charter could be approved by the state and paid for by the state, but not out of Chapter 75. Instead, we have experienced like the Gloucester Community Arts Charter School, which is imposed upon the local community, and everybody was a loser. The students that attend Gloucester Public Schools were and continue to be shortchanged. I just want to quickly mention House 468, which addresses some of the problems that we've talked about today with charter schools, the student attrition and so forth. Representative, I'm blank on her name, spoke about it today. Provost spoke on it earlier today. Finally, H365 prohibits for-profit business and corporate entities for managing a charter school. Although current law prohibits granting a charter to a for-profit entity, in essence, the hiring of for-profit management companies is a backdoor way of having companies make a profit from running public schools. CPS also have a number of other bills that it's in favor of and against in the investigation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this evening? I just have to ask you one clarifying question. You said something about 10% of the budget of Boston Public Schools is spent on charter school tuition.
Yes.
Do you know what the percent of students are that are beneficiaries of that?
No, but I can find that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruth Rodriguez, that I asked you to keep in mind because there is still wait.
I'm going to start with good morning, but I guess good afternoon. My name is Ruth Rodriguez. I'm a member of Save Our Schools, a national movement that fights to preserve public education, and former president of Citizens for Public Schools. I'm here today to voice my opposition to House Bill 425 and House Bill 529, and to lend my support to House Bill 372, which asks for a moratorium on charter schools. The citizens of Massachusetts have shown great patience, allowing the charter school experiment to grow in urban communities, especially communities serving students with the most needs. Despite limited or no improvement, and despite its inability to live up to the promise of helping to reduce the growing achievement gap between white and students of color, we continue to see a rise in the for-profit charter schools, while neighborhood schools labeled as failing based on a single standardized test with a claim of financial hardships are being closed in record numbers. This move places the biggest burden on children of color by forcing them to go to school outside of their neighborhood. Schools that may not provide a better academic experience and at the same time significantly deny services to students with special needs and to English language learners. Charter schools are predominantly operated by corporations goal is to make a profit for its investors. These schools are organized around the same principles as factory production lines, but our children are not to be viewed as commodities, and their education should be about developing the whole child as critical thinkers. After examining the management of many of the charter schools in our area, you can find that almost 99% of its leaders are business moguls or CEOs of large corporations, many of which have amassed huge profits. Sadly, many charter school leaders have no education experience, nor have ever set foot in a public school classroom. A proposed charter school in New Bedford listed Savi's, a foreign company, as the operating manager. So even foreign companies are lured to join in the for-profit charter school movement, a classic example of outsourcing American jobs. This movement is not rooted in educationally sound pedagogy, nor does it consider the families and children of the public school by encouraging the inclusion of members of the community who have a vested interest in their children's success, not the profit of corporations. If you don't understand the journey of those we serve, you cannot culturally become an advocate. So today, I make it plea to this body of policymakers, before you take this important vote, that you stop and consider the harmful effects that 2 decades of privatizing our public schools has had on teaching and learning, on teacher morale with union busting and labeling our community school as failures. I ask you to consider this. Our state has granted this experiment ample time to prove it can deliver its promise to help improve all schools, as well as its promise to help eliminate the achievement gap, and on both counts, it has failed. Consider that the real beneficiary of this experiment have been corporations and testing industries that have posted huge profits at the expense of our democratic public schools. After listening to some of the people that have testified, I just also would like for you to consider the gentleman who made the report on the credit report, that you investigate. Valerie Strauss from the Washington Post has a very interesting take on that report, and I hope that you will look at this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Madam?
I just have a comment, and I don't expect to respond to this. There is a great deal I have to learn about education and how to do it in the Commonwealth today, but I need to know more about the perspective that you are bringing to this, because I was deeply concerned when the gentleman from Lawrence, who talks so passionately about his community, the multi-thousand students on the waiting list, the lack of available seats with only 103 long-terms, who then responded to my colleague that he would love to go to the Cape. I just found that shocking. So I think for us to understand what's actually happening in charter schools, who's making money on it, is very important. And so I personally commit to learning more about that. Thank you.
I Google most of the charter schools whenever, and if you look at the board of directors, you will see hardly any have any educators on their board of directors. You can Google them. You can check all the charter schools in Massachusetts and find out who are the board of directors.
Just as a follow-up, I urge you to look at elected school committee members across the Commonwealth and tell me how many of them have an educational background. Because if we're going to compare educational policy setting institutions at the local level, then let's compare educational policy setting public boards subject to open meeting laws, subject to special employee status in the Commonwealth and ethics and everything else. That if you're going to look at every member of every board of a charter school, that's fine. Then let's look at every member of a school committee and who's making decisions in our local communities for the rest of our public schools as well. If you want to compare apples, compare apples. If you want to compare apples and oranges, we want to do that.
Because I can tell you, I taught in Worcester, Massachusetts. We had a superintendent, Caledonia, who was just one of the biggest opponents of charter school because he felt that it was draining funds from the regular school. When he left, all of a sudden the district found a superintendent who, according to Worcester Magazine, is a graduate of the Ross School of Superintendent. This is a school that trains superintendents to run schools as a business. And this is what's happening across this country.
Thank you. Next on the list we have Ann O'Halloran. Good afternoon. I actually need my glasses. I'm actually a retired Massachusetts teacher. I'm here today reading a statement by another retired teacher whose name is Nancy Bloom. She could not be here today, so she asked me if I would speak for her. She writes, I worked as a special education teacher at a large Boston charter school from 2007 to 2012. Based on that experience, I believe that charter schools are possibly dangerous and certainly untested. Punishments, consequences, and rewards for the few ruled the children in the K-6 school. DESE statistics bear out that the same kind of culture exists in our Commonwealth's many charter schools. Roxbury Prep tops the list of out-of-school suspensions with 56.1% in the latest data. The Edward Brooke Charter, often cited as a model school, has a suspension rate of 24.9%. Common sense tells you that keeping kids out of school disrupts their education and, more importantly, robs kids of the belief that they are good people who deserve to learn. Kids coming back from suspension are angrier and more defiant than when they left. Charters place enormous value on silence. Silent straight lines in the hallways, silent working at their desks for the day, silent waiting for dismissal to go home. This school's entrenched system of discipline focused on a pocket chart with the student names and 3 small cards, green, yellow, and red. Yellow is warning, and red signals detention. Parents would greet their kids after school with an anxious, "Did you stay on green today?" The few kids who stay on green year after year get all kinds of rewards, but the cards have no real meaning. It doesn't help kids to reflect on their own behavior or learn how to monitor the disruptive outburst. The fact is, behavior at that school is awful. The fact is, punishment just doesn't work. Flipping cards from one color to another doesn't work either. The kids are learning blind resistance to an irrational authority. Doing what doesn't work is a hallmark of the charter where I taught. The most disturbing expression of this is the school's obsessive approach to MCAS prep, focusing on test-taking strategies rather than actual experiential hands-on learning. The test scores, however, remain abysmally low year after year, with many hours of valuable instructional time focused on test prep, emphasizing previous MCAS tests. The worst thing I saw in that school, she writes, is the way special education students are marginalized, particularly as they approach testing season. During my last year there, special ed and behavioral students were removed from their inclusion classrooms during test prep. They were taken to small rooms where non-teachers wrestled for their attention. That was hopeless. Those rooms were wild. In the meantime, regular education students stayed with 2 teachers, including the teachers who were hired to teach the special ed students. We were told that it made more sense to keep licensed teachers with the kids who could pass the MCAS. Why waste our expertise on special ed kids? Why approve more of something that's clearly not working? Why not spend our taxpayers' money on public schools where special education students are treated as equals to their typically developing peers? I urge you to declare a moratorium on approving further charter schools. And I'm read it. I also have a statement from one more person. Is it okay to read? She had to leave too. That's a lot. This is Maureen O'Connor. She's a retired Newton, Boston, and Randolph teacher. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 257, the moratorium for Commonwealth charter schools. Education historian Diane Ravitch and New York City parent advocate Leonie Hamison write that the expansion of charter schools in New York City has been a source of widening inequity. A quote from The Nation. Yesterday, that's May 6th. Last year, the NAACP filed suit against one of the charter school districts in New Orleans for refusing to accept students with special needs. Although as far as we know, Massachusetts charters have not been this egregious, we do know that some charter schools accept students with less severe learning disabilities, while others advise parents of students who can't cut it, and she mentions Up Charter in South Boston, to transfer to regular public schools. We need to consider two other options to charters that exist within district public schools. The first would be to increase the number of pilot schools in Boston without increasing the class size in regular Boston schools. We don't want to further add to a two-tiered public school system, one in which parents clamor for more pilot schools, putting more limited resources there at the expense of regular schools who are left with the most at-risk students. The second option is innovation schools, created under the 2010 Achievement Gap Act. We now have 44 innovation schools in Massachusetts, with 6 more under consideration for next year. Although charter-like in flexibility, budget, and hiring, neither pilots nor innovation schools draw money away from local districts, and they pay teachers a decent living wage. The moratorium on Commonwealth charter schools will also give parents, educators, and researchers more time to evaluate the efficacy of pilot and innovation schools compared to charter schools. To be fair, we need to use holistic assessments, that is, multiple measures of progress for all. I urge you to declare a moratorium on approving further charter schools. And I also have a statement from one more person. Is it okay to read? She had to leave too. That's a lot, please. This is Maureen O'Connor. She's a retired Newton, Boston, and Randolph teacher. I'm here in support of Senate Bill 257, the moratorium for Commonwealth charter schools. Education historian Diane Ravitch and New York City parent advocate Leonie Hamison write that the expansion of charter schools in New York City has been a source of widening inequity. A quote from The Nation. Yesterday, that's May 6th. Last year, the NAACP filed suit against one of the charter school districts in New Orleans for refusing to accept students with special needs. Although as far as we know, Massachusetts charters have not been this egregious, we do know that some charter schools accept students with less severe learning disabilities, while others advise parents of students who can't cut it, and she mentions Up Charter in South Boston, to transfer to regular public schools. We need to consider two other options to charters that exist within district public schools. The first would be to increase the number of pilot schools in Boston without increasing the class size in regular Boston schools. We don't want to further add to a two-tiered public school system, one in which parents clamor for more pilot schools, putting more limited resources there at the expense of regular schools who are left with the most at-risk students. The second option is innovation schools, created under the 2010 Achievement Gap Act. We now have 44 innovation schools in Massachusetts, with 6 more under consideration for next year. Although charter-like in flexibility, budget, and hiring, neither pilots nor innovation schools draw money away from local districts, and they pay teachers a decent living wage. The moratorium on Commonwealth charter schools will also give parents, educators, and researchers more time to evaluate the efficacy of pilot and innovation schools compared to charter schools. To be fair, we need to use holistic assessments, that is, multiple measures of progress for all
charter schools. I'm just wondering if you know if that rate is a percentage of the student head count that has experienced suspension, or is it a percentage of student hours?
I do know the answer to this because I found it quite shocking, and therefore I feel that suspension rate misrepresents the actual numbers of kids. If it just counts a kid the first time they're suspended. So if they're suspended 3, 4 more times, it doesn't show up in that.
So it's a percentage of the student body that has ever experienced
one time. Exactly. But that is very interesting. If you look at, on the website, at the website, and the schools that are top in suspension rates, 15 out of the top 19 are charter schools. Yes,
colleague from the Boston area that was telling me that they looked into those rates in the past.
Yeah,
And that many of them, as you mentioned, they were at one time.
yeah.
And then the students that had experienced the first intervention, that after the first year of enrollment in the school, that the individual students dropped off precipitously, as if they had not been given sort of the fine line of behavior and then imposed the sanction and then learned from the lesson,
Right.
then continued on for 3 years without suspension. Have you looked at the data at that level?
No.
I would urge you to look at that and see how many children learned their lesson.
More research than I've done. But that's interesting. I'm sure that school, for that school, that is probably correct, but I wonder about others. Yes. Thank you.
Tracy O'Connell.